I grew up here in Pasadena, California. I came here when I was very small, when I was from Mexico. And my parents worked, my dad was all sorts of jobs, did all sorts of jobs, odd jobs, finally became a roofer, and my mom was a garment worker. And so they came here from Mexico and they worked in factories, laundromats, etc., across the border, got here. My family, almost everybody, didn't have any immigration status. We had one uncle who was like a U.S. citizen, he was by marriage, and so he was like this really big deal in our family. But anyway, I just saw growing up, both because we didn't have a lot of money, growing up poor, but also growing up as an immigrant without legal status, that a lot of things didn't make sense to me. I was the oldest, so I was also connected to the American world, as my mom called it. And I just saw the way people treated my parents, both my mom and my dad, who were people that I really respected and who, they were my parents. And then every time we'd go out into sort of the world outside, they were really mistreated. And whether it was in the workplace or just generally. And so I just couldn't understand it, and it really upset me. And then the other part that really upset me was the fact that I was a little kid having a lot of adult responsibilities because I spoke English, my parents didn't, and even though my dad really tried, he took and eventually learned the language, same thing with my mother, but at that point in our life it was hard. So anyway, when I was about 10 or so, or maybe a little older, my mom was picked up in an immigration raid at a factory, and along with my uncle and my aunt, deported back to Mexico. And so when they came back, my father anxiously looked for a way to fix our papers in this country, and we were able to. But that really left a mark in me.
So how old were you again when this happened?
I was about 10 years old, I would say, maybe a little.
That'd be traumatic.
It was just a moment in time where I just thought, like, all the things that we feared happened, right? My mom was picked up at the factory, sent back, and then came back in the trunk of a car along with my uncle and a bunch of other people. And
how much later was that? How long?
Oh, it wasn't very much long. I would say maybe within 2 to 3 weeks she was back home with us. But it was really hard. It was really hard. And my family eventually were able to fix their papers in 1986 with the amnesty. Because I was the one who actually could read and write in English, I ended up filling up a lot of their paperwork. And then every time that we had a new family member who arrived from Mexico, they stayed with us. Because I was the one who spoke English, I would go job hunting with them, going to employment factories, etc. And I would fill out their paperwork, and I would ask whoever was the manager if there was any jobs available. I had to explain sometimes, do they have papers? No. Maybe we wouldn't say anything. I would actually go with my family members to get false documents. For me, it just became this world. It was our world, right? But there was a deep sense of something's wrong here. And especially when I would go to factories where the owner or the manager just really mistreated, whether it was my uncles or my aunts. And it really made me very angry. And I wasn't sure where. Sometimes I would be angry at my family because I was like, why don't you know English? Just as a kid, not quite understanding it. So anyway, I say all this because it wasn't until I really got into college that I put my life together with all these labels that you talk about discrimination or that you talk about just learning about class issues. I remember being in college and then going, so that's what it is. Oh, so that's why this is going on. Just understanding sort of society, and I was a major in sociology and also in history. So I focused most of my work on issues of race relations in the United States. And so many things just clicked. It was like, I remember thinking, okay, so this is why things this makes sense. And then I've always loved history, so then understanding the history of the United States. And then I started focusing a lot on immigration. I was just so into, like, why are things the way they are? It's this incredible journey. But along the way, I met two professors. One of them was Peter Dreyer. He was the first person who ever introduced the word organizing to me. And we had this whole course on organizing, and I was just fascinated by all this. But from a theoretical, more perspective, I was involved in Mecha Alas Chicano organization. So I was the chair of this and did a lot of stuff, from taking over the school administration building because the way that they treated a lot of the minority students. But for me, it was a lot of activism. My other professor, Hector Delgado, was my sociology professor, and I learned a lot about his work around union organizing of the undocumented. Another focused just on issues of Latin America, and who introduced me to more of what was going on in the civil wars in El Salvador, the things that I was seeing on Spanish language television about what was happening to Central America, and I just needed to understand why so many of us were here in the United States. So I think that was my background, but then as soon as I graduated from Occidental, I moved to the East Coast because I was going to go to Yale University to get a master's in international relations. But I love the way life is. I had a teacher in high school who used to say, if you're flexible with life, we'll be flexible with you.
Ooh,
so I had this whole
one.
plan of going to like Yale and this plan of getting a PhD, etc. But love took me to New Jersey.
Loved it.
Loved it. I say there was no other reason why I was in New Jersey other than I was in love with somebody who was going to Princeton University at that time. And I ended up working in a little nonprofit called the Mercer County Hispanic Association. And it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me because I was there and I still had this idea of assistance, service. The organization had offices in Princeton because a lot of immigrants from Mexico and from Guatemala were the gardeners and the cooks and the nannies from that very affluent area. They also had an office in Trenton, New Jersey, in the capital. It was also in the early 90s with just horrible depression in terms of wages, like the drug epidemic, people on heroin, and it was just a lot. So my job at this organization was emergency housing assistance. It was also working with all the immigrant community. So I was like the go-to person around immigration issues. And I just learned a lot because I think it's very hard. And I would say a lot of my idealism was checked around the reality of where people's lives are, both by individual choices, but by more structural situation. And so I started seeing individuals to get people who are about to lose their house not to be out in the street. To get homeless families back in houses or in apartments, or find them a place so they wouldn't be out there. And I remember how hard it was for me. All the questions like, why aren't people in this situation? And it wasn't just about their choices. It was about people losing a job and not having a safety net. It was about somebody dying and all of a sudden not being able to pay for the rent. It was about a divorce that went horribly wrong and a wife who had never worked, who had kids who they had to take care of. It was about immigrants who had arrived and had nobody. We also had an emergency food pantry and also emergency clothing since it's in the winter. We're just seeing like so many immigrants coming in from these tropical zones, not understanding that they had to wear extra socks. And all this stuff just got to me. And we were just doing a lot of service. And then because a lot of the people were also Puerto Rican, they were citizens, it dawned on me like that citizenship for me was like always the solution. And so for me, it's if we could only all become citizens, like my uncle was this great guy who was like making it, then everything would be okay. And it suddenly dawned on me, I'm like, wait a sec, but Puerto Ricans, they're citizens of the United States. They should have access to benefits. They should have access to all these other things that as immigrants, sometimes we just don't have access to. And I started noticing how all these citizens were just being mistreated, and sometimes because of language, sometimes because people just didn't know, and just because there was so much mistreatment of people who are poor. So I'd go into these offices to try to, welfare offices and emergency housing offices or the Section 8 housing, and I would just hate the way that people treated them. And so my job was to be there to make sure that they got the benefit that they needed as citizens, right? Anyway, I was also totally out of my comfort zone, and it just really shook me a lot. And it just made me try to figure out things, not just like person by person trying to fix things individually, but really, what I remember one day, coming back home, I'm on the bus after this horrible situation with one of the people who came into the organization, and I just said, there has to be a better way. This just can't be the way, that just one person at a time. And how many more people are going to come tomorrow? And it just was like, there's something, we have to change it in a different way, and we have to do work in a different manner. I love the people, I feel comfortable, but this is not how I'm going to make a difference. But at that moment in time, I said, if I'm going to do anything, I'm going to go back to LA. And if I'm going to really dedicate my life, I have to go back home. At that point, I think I gave up on this idea that I was going to go back to Yale University. I came to LA, and I had a friend who was working at CHIRLA, and I knew about CHIRLA as an immigrant, knowing about an organization that sort of protects your rights. And I had a friend who was working here who was the administrator of the organization, and the organization was just barely or had gotten its 501c3 status. And she says, Angelica, I know you really like to do organizational stuff. And she says, you're just organized, and I know you get payroll. That's literally what she said. She said, why don't you come? I need you to come and help me. Just volunteer some work. And I was in search for a different type of job. It was just in between wherever my life was going to take me. And I said, sure. So I came here as a volunteer, and I was helping her. And then she ended up getting married. She said, why don't you apply for my job? I'm going to be leaving. And then I said, well, I'm not sure about this. And so anyway, I decided with this sort of like friend agreement that I'll do this and I'll help it. I'll be here for a year. That's literally what was my commitment to CHIRLA at that moment. And I loved the organization. They were doing a lot of work around the aftermath of Prop 187 as a discrimination against immigrants in general, and even people born in the United States, because people assumed that they were immigrants. So I applied. I actually got accepted to this administrator position, which I didn't quite understand. I was going to be helping set up systems here. So it wasn't even through the organizing realm. Anyway, so 15 years later, I'm still here, right? But it was during the time that I learned a lot about organizing while at CHIRLA.
Yes.
At that same time that I was coming in, a lot of work was being done on the day labor program, because CHIRLA was the only organization in the entire country working with day laborers. And we were in the middle of litigation with that LA County around the anti-solicitation ordinance here in the county. There's huge fights. The people who were doing the day labor organizing most of the people were Central American immigrants themselves. Many of them who had been involved in the Civil War. The reason that they were in this country was because they fled the country because of their political involvement back home. It was a small staff. And I just remember being immersed in what it meant to be doing popular education, what it meant to be organizing the men in the corners. We were opening up the day labor centers by the police, going out there because they were basically trespassing or loitering, or it was a way by the police
to disperse everybody and get them out.
Not only the day laborers. So part of our job was always to try to get people, bail them out. Very much engaged more in like the litigation and the advocacy at the time. I think the organizers with the day labor program, and also beginnings our household worker program, were really more intent on the idea of organizing as a method, as a very important strategy within the organization. It was about how do you engage all these immigrants themselves in really having responsibility and participation, fighting against all these anti-solicitation ordinances. If we're going to be fighting the police, we can't just be doing it for people. We have to be doing it with people. At our organization, day laborers would come in, and the expectation was that they would be participating wholeheartedly and significantly in the fight. And
that's a big shift.
It was a really big shift. I worked for about 5 years, and there was just a sort of reorganization within the organization. And I was asked, it was one of those things where I always say, I don't know if it was that I stepped up or if everybody stepped back and I was the only one who stood.
Everybody's looking at you.
And so they asked me to be the interim director while there was a executive director search. I was about into my 7th or 8th month of being the interim executive director. I think I just made a decision. I've been doing this, let me try it. At that point, I think I was like 27 or 28. And I think about the naive, you're just naive in terms of what you're getting into, but you're really young and you're really passionate about what you want to do, and you think you can do it, and you have the sense when you don't know all that it will entail, but you think you can do it, right?
It's fortunate in a way that it happens that way. Do all of the stuff that it might lead to.
Yeah, no, I
freak you out.
One of those things that I'm really proud of is the work around making this organization an organizing organization. For me, it was about the integrity of an organization that serves immigrants, and for it to be an organization that was about immigrants, but it was doing its work with immigrants. And I always thought people should come in and they should feel like this is the one place where I'm welcomed, this is the one place where I'm going to be treated right, and that's not going to happen if we don't have a different sensibility, which is not we're going to help people just in terms of providing service, but we are going to engage this community, and these are the most important people to be part of our organization in order for our organization to succeed. As part of our strategic plan that year, we made a very difficult decision. I didn't think it was going to be so difficult because a lot of folks thought maybe it wasn't such a good idea for Chirla to be organizing directly. We had been doing the work with day laborers, yes, but it was anomaly, right? And yeah, we've been doing the work with household workers, yeah, but maybe it's an anomaly. And we had started to venture in doing work with immigrant youth, and so it was, no, this is more central to the organization. Had a very big discussion and then made it one of our official strategies, which was going to be about organizing day laborers, organizing household workers, and immigrant youth. If we were thinking about the future of our movement, I would say maybe that was one of the best decisions that we made as an organization. We were doing the work, and we were going to have a real intention around hiring organizers. It wasn't just coordinators of programs, ensuring people actually had backgrounds in organizing, a real understanding about how we were going to move forward. That's the only way that we were going to win. It wasn't going to be because a lot of people who cared about immigrants were going to stand in unison. So actually our mission statement was changed to talk about engaging immigrants and their allies, that immigrants were central. Right after that, we started people to do immigrant youth organizing. Out of that, we were able to move on one of our biggest campaigns, successful campaigns, which was winning AB 540. AB 540, which is in-state tuition for young people. And that's made all the difference. Most of our young organizers now are young people who we met when they were in high school. So I've seen so many young people able to succeed. And I remember just having so many young people come into our organization and not understand where their life was going to go because of their documents and their papers, and parents who came in crying because they felt like they had somehow failed their kids. So now we're in like 10 high school campuses, 39 campuses across the state of California. Our youth program is in college campuses, community colleges, public universities, some private universities, where a lot of our young people who graduate from our Wise Up high school program then started these college campus clubs on immigrant rights and support of young people who need to go on to college and stay in college and succeed. And so that's something really wonderful and great. And I think about all these young people who've become very politicized through the connection, through our organization, have also honed their skills on organizing. A lot of what I felt was I learned by sort of a sink or swim. I learned a lot on the way to have a real methodology they can think about and adapt to what they need to do.
Come up with that methodology on your own, or were there people that helped you in that transition?
Oh, I think
in terms of this organizing?
CCC was a major of that transition when we did the National Campaign for Jobs and Income Support.
Oh, that's right.
For me, on an individual level, that was a very instructive and informative period because it was in campaign, the relationships that were built and the way I remember listening to people who were working on transportation issues, housing issues, and how they were engaging in the work. And it was just at the right time. It was just like the campaign's happening, we're deciding to really go deep in organizing. I'm exposed, and other staff are exposed to all these organizers from around the country who were maybe not doing work on immigration, but were doing work on other issues.
Yes.
That connection and all that rubbed off, right? The other thing would be that all the day labor organizing we were doing. Here we were able to successfully open up 3 more day labor centers. The litigation against the Los Angeles County Ordinance, that's precedent case for the rest of the country. And we started going around the country doing a lot of, this is what we learned around the day labor centers, and all of a sudden day labor centers were popping up around the country. So then there was this idea of forming a day labor union nationwide, and which now is the National Day Labor Organizing Network. And so I think that connection with lots of Central American organizers who were also doing day labor work, IAF, also with some of the unions and the way that they were doing their work. I remember even being told, there's no way you can organize immigrant youth on a national platform, which was the DREAM Act, right? And I remember being told, you're never going to be able to organize young people on an issue that is federal, on an issue that is national. Most young people get organized on school-based issues at a very local level. And I remember just saying, okay, that's a challenge. How do you organize people locally to understand, fight for these changes in immigration that are federal issues and then necessitate a national platform, right? So it's a challenge. I think our jobs as organizers is about being risk takers and about sometimes trying to change the conventional wisdom about how things are done, but also it's about ultimately getting a lot of people involved, engaged, politicized, educated, feeling comfortable about themselves as people, comfortable about being with others, and then comfortable about engaging their ideas, and then from those ideas moving into action. So I feel like that's something that Chirla has really forged ahead in. And prior to making organizing one of our main strategies,
yes.
I think there was a lot of very significant work engaging immigrants, fighting tooth and nail through litigation strategies, through real strong advocacy strategies. But I think that the litigation strategies, the advocacy strategies, the community education strategy just become sharper, and they become much more powerful when you actually engage people directly. And they're able to then influence all those different components with the community ed work. One of our most successful campaigns has been the Know Your Rights video. It was really exciting because our members are in the video, our members were doing the presentation, they were going to churches, they go to schools, and they're able to present. And not only are they able to present, but they're in it, and so they remember, how did we do it? So in that video we have members from our Street Vendors Committee, which is another aspect of the work that we do, members from our Day Labor Committee, our Household Worker Committee, our Immigrant Youth. And so it's a thing where they're part of the whole thing, and so all of a sudden it's not, oh, staff at Chirla, or Chirla is about these people, or these people who are in this office. Chirla is my organization, and I'm Chirla. And that's, I think, something really
terrific.
important.